Before sunrise, while the windows of Durban, West Virginia, were still dark, Orrin Vale lit the coal in his forge and waited for the first thread of smoke to rise through the chimney. At 73, Orrin was the town's blacksmith, welder, and farm equipment repairman. Though most people simply called him when something made of metal refused to work. His wife, Lenora Whitlock Vale, 70, was a retired school secretary. Their son, Merritt Vale, was 42 and worked as an industrial maintenance manager at a manufacturing plant in Charleston. He respected machinery but considered his father's forge obsolete. To Merritt, the forge represented years of missed dinners, soot on the kitchen floor, burns on his father's arms, and a childhood spent holding tongs while other boys played baseball beside the river. Lenora often told him that his father loved through work because words had never come easily to him. Merritt dismissed that explanation. Repairing somebody else's plow isn't the same as talking to your son, he once said. Lenora did not disagree. No, she replied, but sometimes people give what they know how to give. Merritt's younger sister, Thessaly Vale, was 38 and worked as an emergency room nurse at Pocahontas Memorial Hospital. She remained close to their parents and understood the parts of Orrin that Merritt had stopped trying to see. When she suggested that Merritt might someday regret treating every invitation from their father as a demand, he told her there was nothing noble about preserving a trade the modern world had already replaced. In early spring, Merritt returned to Durban to help his parents replace the water heater. He brought new fittings, electronic leak sensors, and a compact pump he had ordered online. Orrin watched him work from the basement stairs, leaning more heavily than usual on the railing. When the installation was finished, Orrin asked Merritt to come to the forge. A hand-operated pump used by the volunteer fire department sat disassembled on the workbench. The town had installed an electric water system years earlier, but Orrin maintained the old pump in case a storm cut power to the valley. Its iron linkage was worn, and a brass valve no longer sealed properly. "Help me rebuild it," Orrin said. Merritt wiped his hands on a rag. "The fire department should replace it. They don't have the money." "Then the county should." Orrin rested one hand on the pump housing. "The county is 40 miles away when the road is clear." Merritt looked around the forge at the coal fire. Hand drills, tongs, foot-powered grinder, and shelves of steel. "This is exactly the problem. You keep saving things that should be retired." Orrin's expression tightened. "A thing isn't useless because it's old, and it isn't valuable just because you spent your life fixing it." The sentence landed harder than Merritt intended. Orrin looked at him for several seconds, then lowered his eyes to the broken pump. "I never asked you to spend your life here." Merritt laughed without humor. "You asked every time you pointed to that apron. I asked you to learn enough that you'd never be helpless." Merritt felt 12 years old again, standing beside the anvil while his father corrected his grip instead of noticing the blister beneath his thumb. "I built a career without this place," he said. "I'm not helpless." Orrin nodded once. "Then I suppose there's nothing left for me to teach you." Merritt left before dinner. Lenora called the following week and said Orrin had collapsed beside the cooling trough. By the time the ambulance reached the house, his heart had stopped. Merritt listened with his jaw locked. Every story praised a version of his father that seemed generous, patient, and devoted. Merritt wondered why that man had been easier to find in other people's memories than in his own. After the burial, Lenora gave Merritt and Thessaly the keys to the forge. Thessaly wanted to preserve it. Merritt wanted to sell the property to a couple from Virginia who planned to turn the stone building into a vacation cabin. "Dad's tools will rust," he said. "The roof already leaks." "Mom shouldn't carry the cost of a monument," Thessaly answered. "It wasn't a monument while he was alive." Merritt began sorting the forge anyway. Orrin had recorded decades of repairs in careful handwriting. Some entries listed ordinary prices. Others said paid after harvest, no charge for widow, trade for firewood, boy needs truck for work, or community account. Merritt closed the book. He understood generosity, but he also understood unpaid bills, property taxes, and the cost of replacing a roof. Then he found a drawer filled with metal tags bearing names. Each tag matched an unfinished repair. There was a cracked towing bracket for Ransom Pruitt, a 66-year-old cattle farmer, a set of porch railings for Ione Kester, an 81-year-old retired piano teacher, and a steel brace for the volunteer rescue squad's aging equipment trailer. Each time someone told him his hands moved like his father's, he hated hearing it, partly because it was true. One evening, Lenora found him sitting inside the forge with the ledger open on his knees. "He should have talked to you," she said. Merritt looked up, surprised by the directness of her words. He thought providing was the same as being present. Sometimes it was, sometimes it wasn't. Merritt ran his thumb over Orrin's handwriting. "Then why does everyone else remember him as patient?" Lenora sat beside him. "Because he practiced patience on strangers, with family. He assumed love would excuse what he failed to say." Merritt expected her to defend Orrin. Instead, she gave him something more difficult, the truth, without turning either man into a villain. 3 weeks after the funeral, a storm settled over the mountains. Rain began before dawn and continued through the night, soaking the slopes above Durban and swelling the Greenbrier River. Thessaly was working at the hospital in Buckhannon and could not return before the roads closed. Merritt had come home to meet the prospective buyers of the forge, but the couple canceled when the weather worsened. By midnight, wind had knocked trees across the highway. A mudslide buried the eastern road, and floodwater damaged the bridge south of town. Electricity failed across the valley. Cell service faded soon after. Durban was isolated. Then Chief Bracken Cole arrived at the Vale house. Bracken was 58 and worked as a logging contractor when he was not leading Durban's volunteer fire department. Water streamed from his coat, and blood marked one sleeve where a branch had cut him. The station generator would start, but could not hold a steady speed. Without it, the department could not power its radio equipment or refill portable oxygen cylinders. Worse, the town's electric water pump had shut down after the control panel flooded. The old hand pump Orrin had asked Merritt to repair was still lying in pieces on the forge bench. "I'm not my father," Merritt said. Bracken looked toward the dark road behind him. "No one asked you to be. We're asking whether you can help." At the fire station, Merritt removed the generator cover and found that a steel governor linkage had snapped. The part was irregular, badly worn, and no longer manufactured. A young volunteer named Oakes Fenner stood beside him holding a lantern. Oakes was 19 and worked at a nearby sawmill. He had spent several months learning basic metalwork from Orrin after finishing high school. "Mr. Vale would have forged one," Oakes said. Merritt stared at the broken piece. "That part controls the engine speed. Close isn't good enough." He said close isn't the goal. "Fit is." Merritt almost told him to be quiet. Then he remembered Orrin saying the same thing while teaching him to shape a hinge pin. The memory carried no warmth, only the sharp frustration of being corrected. Yet beneath that frustration was knowledge. The forge felt colder without Orrin in it. Merritt lit the coal, but the electric blower was useless without power. Oakes turned the hand crank while Bracken brought lanterns from the station. The first fire burned weakly. Merritt adjusted the coal bed, opened the air channel, and tried again. This time the center glowed orange. He selected a length of steel, heated it, and carried it to the anvil. Orrin's hammer rested where he had left it, the hickory handle polished by decades of use. Merritt raised it and struck too hard. The steel flattened unevenly. He turned it, struck again, and twisted the edge. His third blow drove the piece out of alignment. He threw the ruined steel onto the floor. "This is a waste of time." Oakes stopped cranking. In the sudden quiet, rain hammered the roof. "He ruined things too," Oakes said. "Not when people were waiting for oxygen." He kept his mistakes under the bench. Merritt crouched and pulled out a shallow wooden box. Inside were warped hinges, split punches, crooked hooks, and blades burned beyond repair. Near the bottom lay a small hammerhead with an off-center eye. Merritt recognized it immediately. He had forged it when he was 13. He remembered being ashamed of it and leaving it behind. Orrin had kept it for nearly 30 years. Merritt held the misshapen hammerhead in both hands. "He told me it was no good." Oakes shook his head. "He showed it to me. Said it proved you came back the next morning and tried again." Merritt closed his eyes. He had remembered criticism because pain preserves certain moments more clearly than tenderness. He had forgotten returning to the forge, forgotten Orrin setting out a fresh piece of steel, forgotten the quiet cup of hot chocolate waiting near the door. Merritt placed the old hammerhead on the workbench and heated another bar. This time he used shorter blows. checking the shape after each series of strikes. He did not force the steel after it cooled. He reheated it, adjusted the curve, flattened the mounting end, and drilled the pivot hole with a hand brace. At the station, Merritt installed it while Bracken held the lantern. The generator coughed, shook, and settled into a steady rhythm. Lights flickered on. The radio came alive. The oxygen equipment began to run. Bracken only gripped Merritt's shoulder and said, "Your father would have trusted that part." Merritt looked at the rough steel moving inside the machine. "He would have told me where I hit it wrong." Before dawn, a rescue call came from a farmhouse near the river. An elderly man had fallen and possibly fractured his hip. The volunteer crew loaded an oxygen cylinder and medical supplies into the rescue trailer, but the trailer's drawbar bent while crossing a washed-out section of road. The steel brace Merritt had installed earlier prevented the frame from breaking completely. Yet the damaged drawbar had to be reinforced before the trailer could move safely. Merritt returned to the forge with Oakes. Together they shaped a curved plate, punched mounting holes, and welded it over the weakened section using power from the restored generator. Merritt explained why the plate needed rounded edges to spread the load. Oakes listened with the same concentration Merritt once wished Orrin had noticed in him. They repaired the trailer, and the crew reached the injured man. When Merritt returned, Lenora was waiting beneath the forge awning with a thermos of coffee. "You look like him," she said. Merritt stiffened. "I don't want to replace him." "Then don't. He was never supposed to be the only useful man in this family." She handed him the coffee and pointed toward the disassembled hand pump. The town's stored water was running low. Without electricity, the flooded main pump could not refill the tank. Merritt opened Orrin's ledger and found sketches of the old hand system, including measurements for the worn linkage and brass valve. On the final page was a note in his father's handwriting: "Teach Merritt if he ever has the patience. If not, leave the drawings where he can find them." Merritt read the sentence twice. It was not an apology, and it did not erase the years of silence between them. But it was the closest Orrin had come to admitting that timing mattered. That instruction could not be forced, and that love sometimes had to wait without demanding repayment. Merritt and Oakes worked through the morning. They forged a new linkage, shaped a bronze valve seat, and cut a leather seal from an old harness Orrin had stored in the loft. Ransom Pruitt operated the handblower when Oakes grew tired. Ione Kester brought soup. Other residents carried coal, dry gloves, and tools. By afternoon, the repaired pump began drawing water from the protected well behind the station. Volunteers filled containers for the clinic, the school shelter, and families living on higher ground. The pump did not save the whole town at once. It saved it one bucket at a time. County crews reached Durban 2 days later. They cleared the mudslide, restored temporary power, and brought fuel, medicine, and bottled water. No one in town pretended that the forge alone had carried them through the storm. Firefighters, nurses, road workers, farmers, neighbors, and teenagers had all done their part. But many of the repairs that kept those efforts moving had begun beneath Orrin's soot-darkened roof. When the buyers from Virginia contacted Merritt again, he told them the property was no longer for sale. Thessaly drove home after the roads reopened and found him replacing damaged shingles above the forge. "You staying?" she asked. Merritt climbed down the ladder. "I don't know yet," Thessaly smiled. "That's more honest than no." Merritt returned to Charleston for several months. He kept the modern welder, drill press, and precision measuring tools. He also restored the hand blower, treadle grinder, and manual drill. The following autumn, he reopened the building as Vail Mountain Repair and Skills Workshop. He continued taking paid repair jobs, but every Saturday he offered free classes to young people who could not afford trade school. Oakes became his first assistant instructor. A 22-year-old grocery clerk named Endel Sayer learned welding and later found work maintaining equipment at a lumber mill. A 17-year-old student named Clovis Hart learned to restore hand tools and began selling refurbished axes to save for community college. Merritt taught them how to use computer-guided equipment when it was available and how to work without it when it was not. He never told them the old ways were better simply because they were old. He told them every method was a choice, and knowledge mattered because emergencies had a way of removing choices. Lenora visited most Saturday mornings. She kept attendance records at the same desk where Orrin had once written his ledger. Thessaly provided first aid training and made sure every student understood burns, eye protection, and respiratory safety. Above the workbench, Merritt mounted the box of failed tools. He placed his crooked childhood hammerhead in the center. Beneath it, he hung a small sign: "Nothing useful begins perfect." Years later, the forge became known beyond Durban. Schools throughout Pocahontas County sent students to learn emergency repair, metalworking, and equipment maintenance. Merritt helped establish a mobile workshop that traveled to rural communities where trade programs had disappeared. On quiet mornings, Merritt still arrived before sunrise. He lit the fire, listened for the draft in the chimney, and waited until the steel reached the right color before lifting the hammer. Sometimes the ringing carried across the river just as it had when he was a boy. But now the forge door remained open, and other footsteps followed the sound. One winter morning, a new student noticed Orrin's old hammer resting in the front window and asked why no one used it. Merritt took it down, tested its familiar weight, and handed it to the boy. "Tools aren't meant to become monuments," he said. "They're meant to be ready when someone needs them." Then he stood beside the anvil and showed the boy where to place his hands. For most of his life, Merritt believed the forge had been a chain his father wanted him to carry. Only after Orrin was gone did he understand that it had been a door. His father had not known how to hold that door open without making his son feel trapped inside. Merritt could not change the years they had lost, but he could leave the entrance wider for those who came after him. And in that small mountain town, where storms could still close roads and silence machines, the fire continued to burn not because the past refused to die, but because a son finally learned how to carry its best parts forward without surrendering his own life. There may be someone in your life whose love arrived in a form you did not understand. At the time, a parent who worked instead of speaking, a grandparent who saved things others threw away, or a teacher who placed knowledge in your hands before you knew why you would need it. Their imperfections do not erase what they gave, and what they gave does not erase the ways they may have hurt you. Both truths can live together. If this story reminded you of someone whose lessons became clearer only with time, subscribe and stay with us. Here, we tell stories about ordinary people, unfinished relationships, and the quiet acts of courage that continue shaping lives long after the final words have been spoken. By remembering those stories, we keep more than their memory alive. We keep the door open for the next person searching for a way forward.